This is something I went back and forth about sharing because I felt like I don't know how to share it even because sometimes there are things that you experience, you cannot really explain the experience essentially. I mean, each individual has to do it themselves or experience it themselves to truly understand. So having said that, you know, maybe several weeks ago, I shared about meditating, setting aside a whole day to meditate, um, essentially on weekends, whole Saturday. That's what I've been doing. Now I have done about 5 sessions now, 5 different Saturdays. And I shared before what I've experienced, of how I'm doing it, so on and so forth, briefly. Not this past one. I did one this past weekend, this past Saturday. But prior to that, before I went on a trip to India and Vietnam, I had an intense session, my fourth one. So this is kind of what happened, right? I'll try to give as much detail as possible. And it might kind of sound weird or maybe, you might think like, oh, when I might have that, or maybe I'll have that too. And my experience is that's not true. Like I used to listen to, I listened to a lot of podcasts and people, spiritual people, and some of them are like, oh, I experienced out of body experience, all that stuff, right? Or this whole now they are wholly enlightened or like they're delineated from, I mean, so many different experiences they talk about. And I never, I mean, intellectually, maybe I got it, but I'm like, I don't know. Like, if I had ever experienced that, because I've been meditating for 6 years, never had anything like I mean, I had great moments where I felt intense joy and stuff like that happen occasionally, once in a while during meditation, but not something like I mean, completely like a mind-blowing moment, right? I never had that. And I don't know, having listened to many people, like, you know, I got it. Like, yeah, some people might experience it. I wasn't sure that will happen. So anyway, on this particular one, I decided to do the longest session, one sitting session, 40 minutes essentially. So 40 minutes in the sort of a lotus position. I do use a meditation mat, a little bit higher meditation mat. I learned if I use the lower one, kind of, you know, I I guess my leg pain, so I got a hip thing that was going on for me that kind of prohibits me from really doing a full-on lotus position. So I decided, okay, from now on, I'll use a little bit higher one and make sure I can really always do the lotus position, even if it's a little bit slightly modified, but keep the spine erect, right? Because that's very important. That's what I've learned, very important, and also east facing. At least that's what I've learned, and that's what works for me. I'm not saying everybody has to do the east facing, all that stuff, right? But having the spine erect and all seems like that's something people should do if you're really trying to meditate. Now, again, meditation is so many different points. It all depends, right? There's no like one way to meditate. But if you're trying to go deep, deep, right, like go truly deep, then you do it the right way, essentially, at that point. Like you're truly getting to your inner self. Anyway, long story short, this particular session, I was doing it to Nirvana Shatakam. Look it up. The story behind this whole Nirvana Shatakam, it's a poem, is there's a long time ago, 1300 something years ago, there was this Adi Sankaracharya is the name, who revived essentially kind of like the Hinduism or the Swami tradition. And he was searching for a guru, and then he found somebody in the woods, and then asked him to be his guru. And the guru asked, or the wise Swami, sage, yogi asked, like, who are you? And it was a tricky question. So then this Adi Sankaracharya, I mean, I heard different stories. Like from a teenager to 30 years when he asked this question, but just read, it was like, he was like 8 years old. I just can't believe that an 8-year-old said that. Okay. So anyway, that's a different story, right? Let's leave it alone. But the whole Nirvana Shatakam is about Adi Shankaracharya essentially explaining he is this soul. There's eternal soul that there is no, like there's no body, there's no air, anything, right? There's no birth, there's no death, there's no mother, there's no relative. But my particular moment happened and repeatedly listening to the one stanza where he talks about, I was neither born nor will I die. I don't have I don't have a mother, father, relative, but I'm eternal blissful soul. And I'm nothing but everything, essentially. And I kept listening to it, and all of a sudden, I was getting to a point where my legs were aching. And then at that point, I was essentially at that point being an observer. And suddenly I felt this observer, like completely my body wasn't mine, essentially. My body wasn't mine. And then it just, I guess whatever happened, it kind of clicked on me that the soul realization, I don't know how to call it, right? Again, this will all sound like too woo-woo kind of deal. But I started bawling, crying, like, like, oh, kind of deal, like tears streaming down my eyes, realizing what I am, right? Not the body, not the mind. There's something else. And I don't know why I cried, right? It was like, hey, I'm all stuck to this, relatives, all this stuff, thinking I have this, I have, the family, everything kind of essentially at that point realize that's all not reality. A reality of the formless thing, right? And I thought, that day, the rest of the meditation day went great. And I was like feeling it, like where I could observe my body and my mind kind of deal, or at least in parts, not all the time, right? Still thoughts were coming, all that stuff, good stuff, right? With meditation. Just don't, anyway. So a couple of days that kind of was there, like even for a week almost, like whenever I meditated, it was complete delineation. I was at least in parts, right? Maybe for a few minutes every session, like 20 minutes. I do 20 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening, and also do a breathing session, which is 15 minutes. So probably the whole throughout the day, probably an hour, I would say, or 45 minutes to 50 minutes meditation total time, right? But here's the thing, right? Like all of a sudden, like, oh, I am this, or I'm like, oh, now I know I don't have to be attached to this and that. And then a week later, back to square one, being Raju or whoever, like, I got this, I get triggered by something, I get, annoyed by something, or I want this. But who is that? The I there. All of a sudden, I'm still stuck in those brain, mind, body. So that's what kind of made me realize, like, it's, I'm 50 something year old. Regardless of how much time you meditate and all that stuff, unless you're yogi, you've gone into this cave and I guess meditated for several months, maybe then you are like that enlightened person. For people who are living their life, no matter how much you meditate and all, the fact is we will experience stuff and things will come up. And I think it's, at least for me, I think it's bullshit that to think that you having this incredible moment, or at least I having this incredible moment, has changed anything yet. It's going to take a lot of practice, a lot of noticing, a lot of delineating from my from the thoughts and emotions. Thoughts and emotions, all that stuff is not wrong. Nothing is wrong, right? It's an experience. But not getting attached too much, buying into it, right? Experience it, but don't buy into it. Like, don't go with it, like thinking that's who essentially I am. If maybe you don't believe the soul and all that stuff, that's fine. If you don't believe, don't worry. Don't pay attention to this one. But if you are the same thinking as me, as now you think that if you are into that thinking, a soul, which the body is temporary. Like, for example, in the, one of the things that kind of opened up my eyes is reading Bhagavad Gita the first time. Which again, if you read the Bible, similar things are being said, except in a different way. And you have to understand in depth, right? If you just read it and then kind of read it as a religious saying, then you're not going to get it. I don't think that's what Jesus was saying. But anyway, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, anything that has a beginning and an end is not real. That's what is illusion or Maya. That which that exists forever is reality, which means the soul. And the soul is part of the bigger universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And realizing that's where the yogis, whoever, get to, right? But I'm knowing that, kind of even experiencing that, I don't think it matters. I think at times people will still get stuck in it, and there's nothing wrong with it. Experience those emotions, but try to practice looking at them, right? That's what I'm learning. Like, I'm listening to Michael Lasinger's his course, essentially. It's an Audible now, living the life of surrender, or something like that, or the surrender experiment in practice. But that's what he's talking about. Like, it's a practice. You can't just expect all your programming, essentially samskaras, what he calls it, samskaras, which is basically Vedanta or ancient, Indian word, a Sanskrit word, samskara, which means essentially all these impressions. In other words, in the scientific term, impressions on your mind has us believe, or at least me believe, certain things, and certain instances will trigger either good or bad. And most of the time, 99.99%, we always want the good ones and we reject the bad ones, right? Whatever triggers us to feel happy, that's what we want to go towards. And what he shares is really just be with it. Like, if it's a really sad incident, just experience it. But it's easier said than done. That's what I've learned is, all that stuff is great to listen to and think like, okay, I had this moment. Now I know that this body, the mind, is not me. But that only exists. I mean, now I have a hard time even like going back. Like, although I did have the similar sort of experience this past essentially session where I was kind of like observing the body, essentially being like an observer, like everything, breathing, everything, like an observer, like not being attached to the body, I guess, in the sense. But it wasn't the same intense feeling I had. Anyway, the bottom line is why I wanted to share that is, I don't know if anybody else kind of has been doing a meditation for a while and wondered like, hey, or maybe you had an, instance where you felt this reality that the body mind is not really real. There is something else beyond the body mind inside that's really observing, and it really doesn't care. It really doesn't care. It eventually will leave, right? And that's not the person, that's not this ego, whatever the form is, is eventually meant to leave and experience in a different form, maybe, essentially, right? Anyway, bottom line, just if you're into meditation, you're wondering like, when this will happen, it's a practice. What I've learned also the 6 years, 6+ years I've been meditating, how much I advanced at the same time, how much I still have to go, right? But at the same time, I'm so glad I started the journey 6 years ago, 6+ years ago. I wouldn't have been here. I won't be here where I am now without that journey. And obviously I have long ways to go where I'm not getting carried away with the emotions, good or bad, doesn't matter. But still experience them, right? That's the beauty. That's the tricky part where it's okay, experience them as a beautiful feeling, good or bad, and move on, without getting attached to it, right? Same thing with people, right? If you experience somebody, you meet somebody, friend, whatever, significant other, and they leave or whatever happens, then that's what happened. It's a beautiful experience, right? If things didn't work out, they move on. Business relationship, same thing. You had a great business relationship, probably, or a great friendship, even. That ended. But there's a beginning and an end. Why worry about it? There's the life will end. Everything has an ending. And everything that has a beginning and an end, as like in Bhagavad Gita, it said, is not real. It's an illusion, ultimately, because it's not reality. There's an end to it. We'll die. That's an end to it. So it's not reality. Something that exists forever, that's reality. At least according to what Krishna, which makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe it won't make sense to you. There's no like you have to believe it. Hey, you take it what it is. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share. And I'll continue my journey on the whole day meditation, see what I discover more and more. Even if I don't get more on a particular day of meditation, because now there's this comparison, right? Automatic brain comparison of like, I had this incredible moment. Why can't I have another one? Maybe it'll never happen again, but it's what it is. That's not how it works. Things will happen when they will happen. You just don't control what things will happen. You just learn how to embrace those things. Sometimes, well, sometimes maybe we resist. That's what happens. Yeah. Anyway, that's the fun of life. Hope that helps somebody.